But there are people like Andrew who are just lifers. It's not like he ever took a day off from music ever. I mean, he was always involved in the industry in some way.
Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Accolades Conversation Series, in which I talk to some of my favorite artists about who or what they would recommend me checking out. Make sure to subscribe to our channel or hit the like button. Boom Bip is an American record producer and musician. In 2001, he signed to the then Warp sub-label Lex Records. In 2002, his first record on Lex was released, and he had the opportunity to play larger festivals such as Glastonbury, Pukkelpop, Coachella, and many more. Meeting other artists, which resulted in some successful remixes for bands like Mogwai, Boards of Canada, Venetian Snares, Lalipuna, MA3, Oasis, and others. Brian also has a project called Neon Neon with Gruff Reese of Super Furry Animals. With Stella Mozgawa of Warpaint, Boom Bip forms improvisational techno duo Belief, and their debut self-titled album Belief was released on July 15, 2022. I talked to Boom Bip about Andrew Weatherall, an English musician, DJ, songwriter, producer, and remixer. His career took him from being one of the key DJs in the acid house movement of the late 1980s to being a remixer of tracks by the likes of Happy Mondays, New Order, Björk, Diorp, The Future Sound of London, and My Bloody Valentine. His production work on Primal Scream's album Screamadelica, adding samples, loops, and creating an influential mix of hard rock, house, and rave, helped the record win the first ever Mercury Music Prize in 1992, and becoming one of the most celebrated albums of the 90s. If you are into my illustrations, this Accolades series started as an illustration book, which you can still get on our website, craterecords.be. This is what Boom Bip had to say about Andrew Weatherall.
You contacted me asking, you proposed it as, who do you think deserves more respect and, someone who deserves accolades. Yeah. And it was right just before Andrew's passing. And so when he passed away, it was kind of a big deal among a lot of people. I think around like the UK, London scene, especially the electronic scene. And right away in my mind, I was like, man, this dude deserves so much respect. I mean, he got a lot of respect from people. The way I look at Andrew, people like Andrew, they're really like the bones or the glue that kind of keeps the music industry together. Because obviously there are artists who kind of rise up and are in the eyes of fans and people, and they're the obvious ones. But there are people like Andrew who are just lifers. It's not like he ever took a day off from music ever. I mean, he was always involved in the industry in some way, whether that be DJing or remixing, just being at shows, running studios. He was just always in it, and he was kind of that guy that was just holding it all together. And a lot of people like that, I believe, deserve a lot more respect, because those are the people. I mean, like yourself, you're running a record shop, you're deeply involved in the music industry. I think you're one of those people. Like you putting out these books and stuff like that. You might not realize what kind of contribution you're having to the music industry, but it's massive. And that's those people that fill in the gaps between the people who are just doing music, are crucial to keeping the whole industry afloat.
You got to know of him when you first came to Europe with your first record, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I met Andrew. We got booked at the Lex Records Selexism party. I think it was 2000, like summer of 2002. And so it was me and Danger Mouse.
Oh wow!
Who were the two first signings to Lex.
I remember that tour, because I saw a part of that Lex tour around the same time. It must have been the one behind that. It was like Danger Mouse, Gemini, together with Sage Francis, I think.
Yeah, I did a couple of those shows. It was Buck 65,
yeah,
me, Sage Francis, Danger Mouse, Gemini. So that Selexism party that I was booked at, I think the first time I came over to London from like my bedroom in Cincinnati, Tom came over to Scribble Jam and essentially signed me at that time. And it was like, I want you to come over and play one of the Warp Nesh parties. And that was in 2001. And that was wild because there was someone else on the bill called Polygon Window. And I didn't know who Polygon Window was. And I went to sound check, and right there's Aphex Twin hooking up into the mixer, my Vestax scratch mixer that I had, and turns out Polygon Window is Aphex Twin. And so, you know, that was wild. That was like my first time. And I think Andrew was at that party, actually. Those Nesh parties were huge. And that was a big one, just because Aphex wasn't doing a lot of shows at that time. And I don't think he's maybe done like a couple other Polygon Window gigs. And so,
to be honest, I never realized that Lex was a part of Warp. I mean,
yeah.
It makes so much sense in a way, like Big Data and Ninja Tune kind of fit together.
Exactly.
But yeah, I just didn't know.
Same thing. Everything was in-house, and it was really, at that time, it was really in-house, because my contracts were with Warp Records, but then it had, you know, kind of in the details writing like the first subsidiary Lex Records, and you know, it wasn't until like I think the next record where Lex bought itself from Warp and then was a fully independent record label. But at that time, it was fully in-house at Warp, and so the Solexism party with Danger Mouse and I and Andrew was DJing that party, and I vaguely remember the name at that time because I had a radio show in Cincinnati, and I played a lot of, you know, it was a full electronic show, and I think I played like Beth Orton and a few Andrew Weatherall remixes. I would see like his name, you know, remixing people mainly, but I didn't really know much about him. And then I met him at that party, and his set was incredible. Like his records was just like, what the fuck, you know, like who's this guy, you know? And then so we talked that night, and he gave me some really good advice about, I remember talking to him about, I felt like I had a hard time focusing when I made records, because I want to approach so many different genres. And so I'd like to sample myself playing guitar, playing drums, and kind of took it on as coming from kind of like an indie rock background, but really loving electronic music. So I would sample myself doing stuff. And I liked the sound of guitars with drum machines. And so we had a conversation about that. And I just remember him saying, like, you know, don't box yourself in with a genre, and like, just, you know, let whatever you hear, let it flow, like let it come out. And
so what was his background?
Probably what he's most known for is providing the samples for Primal Scream's Screamadelica record.
Oh, okay.
So that plus he was a DJ at the Hacienda. So like 1993, 94 scene, he was deep in that Manchester scene, you know, producing Primal Scream's biggest record, you know, and groundbreaking record. And really the reason that was such a groundbreaking record is because of the samples and the way that it took a band and kind of turned it, like using breaks and stuff over like a really groovy band, was, you know, was groundbreaking at the time. And that was Andrew and this guy Hugo Nicholson, who I went on to work with later. They worked together to produce that Primal Scream record. And then he did Hacienda remixes for Happy Mondays, Hallelujah, My Bloody Valentine. You know, he was deep into that scene, and he was a big remixer, produced and worked on several of these legendary records, and then went on to do like essential mixes on the BBC. He was really well known as like just like an incredible DJ and had insane taste. He was also speaking of Warp, he was half of Two Lone Swordsmen, which were an early Warp signing, early 90s, and also Sabres of Paradise, which remixed Aphex Twin. It was somebody that Sabres of Paradise I connected onto really early, because it was exactly what I was inspired by, what my radio show sounded like. You know, I remember getting like this 12-inch of Sabres of Paradise and just being obsessed with the breaks on it. And you know, he was that guy, and I actually see a lot of parallels between my career and what he does, where, you know, he's kind of in there, but he's not some really big well-known person, but you know, you see his name doing remixes for bigger people, for bigger bands, and you know, producing and DJing and doing radio shows. And so that, those parallels are why I always really connected to him and was inspired by him.
Wait, the names that you name are all indie rock orientated, but he's more of a house DJ, right? Or am I wrong?
He would play house, but he brought that electronic element to those bands. Again, like with Parallels, I was doing the same thing. Like I've remixed a lot of like Snow Patrol or Oasis, and I've done a bunch of rock bands, Super Furry Animals. Like that's what I was doing too. Like I was really connected to that stuff, and was introduced to the UK scene in the early 2000s. There was just this, Mogwai was another band. Like there was just this relationship between that electronic music and rock bands at the time that was just really well connected. And, and Andrew was one of the people that was kind of doing that first, with Primal Scream and My Bloody Valentine. I mean, to take on a My Bloody Valentine remix had to be really daunting, He killed it.
The sampled bass thing, the first thing my head is going to, which has nothing to do with Primal Scream, but it's Portishead, which also used samples, and like, they were the first for me to do like something crossover that I actually like could listen to in some way.
Yeah.
You could do it in so many wrong ways.
And that is exactly what Andrew and I talked about our first conversation, was how it's really hard to make guitars work with drum machines, and that combination can go wrong so easily.
Yeah.
And he really appreciated how I used what I was doing and how I sampled things, and he could hear, like EBO guitars and subtle stuff in it, and he really appreciated that stuff.
What would be the song that you would play to somebody that doesn't know who he is?
That's tough because he's done so many good remixes, and then also his solo work, like with the Two Lone Swordsman. It's got, like, I discovered a lot of deep 70s, 80s dub from him.
Oh, really?
And like the Two Lone Swordsman he had some like really thick early UK dub tracks that I think were on Warp. So yeah, like the Two Lone Swordsman stuff is really great to check out. As far as remixes, I mean, you can't go wrong with the My Bloody Valentine, Soon. Some of his earlier stuff, the Happy Mondays, Hallelujah is like a classic, I think that was like one of the biggest Hacienda songs, was his remix of that tune. I could be wrong, but it's definitely like survived the test of time for one of the best remixes of that song. Those are all great. There's a red 10-inch of Sabres from Paradise. I can't remember what it's called, but if you could find it, it's it's very red. It's got some kind of drawing on it. That has been in my collection for a really long time. From when I really first started buying records, that was just one that I got a hold of at some small shop in Cincinnati.
Were you guys able to get all the Warp stuff and everything like that in the States? Those were all UK labels, right? I don't know how big the export was to the States.
It's interesting because in 1994 I started DJing, and I did a couple trips to New York and heard a little bit of like the Ninja Tune scene that was happening and became obsessed with it. And when I came back to the States, I got a job being a DJ on WAIF, which was a Cincinnati radio station. And this was like more later 90s, like maybe like around like 96, 97. And because of working at the radio station, I kind of had a reason to contact these record labels. So I contacted Ninja Tune, Mowax, Warp, all these labels that I had, More Records, like that I was into directly, and said, hey, listen, I'm a big fan. No one else is playing this in the city. Like, I would love to be able to get this stuff. And so they started sending me tons of records.
Oh yeah, promos and stuff. Yeah.
And then I get in promos at the radio station. And then I got into a record pool where I was able to kind of select that stuff that I wanted to be sent to me. So, there was a while where I was the one that was bringing that sound to the city. And then I was playing that in hip hop club nights. We had a club night called Low End Sequence, and it was me and DJ Osiris, who was from New York. And the two of us, we just were obsessed with that scene. And so we were doing what was called like a hip hop kind of acid jazz night, but I was bringing a lot of that stuff. Like I was bringing Boards of Canada, and having local rappers like freestyle over Boards of Canada, you know, around that time, and people are like, you know, what the fuck is this? You know, like, what is this? And just people didn't know, but it worked because it was all hip hop based stuff anyway, you know. And so the radio station really allowed me to acquire that stuff. And then I opened up a record store, and very similar to what you've got there. It looks like about the same size. And I ran that for several years. And then I was able to actually get with a Canadian distributor to really get what I wanted. So I started getting into a lot of drum and bass, and it was mostly European stuff.
What made you stop?
I was ready to move, and we opened up the shop across the river in Newport, Kentucky, and it was called Hot Wax. And location just wasn't good. It was kind of a dodgy area, but you know, it was a really good run. And I love when I go back to Cincinnati, even now, and I talk to, you know, people who were buying records from me back then, and you'll have the same experience, man. Like it's beautiful. 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now, people are going to come to you and they're going to be like, you know, I bought this record at your shop.
Whenever there's like a 16-year-old guy or girl that's like, this is my first record, I don't even have a record player, I'm like, oh, I'm so happy that you buy it at my store. Like, whatever the fuck it is, I don't care what it is. You'll remember the record. I remember buying BDP, The Bridge Is Over, at the local store here. Yeah, that's a memory that will never disappear. So
there's a small record shops so essential. And I remember the shops that I went into and found my first records all around Cincinnati.
I want to thank Brian for his conversation. Make sure to check out his new project, Belief, with Stella from Warpaint. Next week, I'm going to be talking about something completely different. We're talking about the movie 3 O'Clock High with rapper Louis Logic. Thanks for listening.